Johnny Depp walked into the luxury car dealership like any other customer, but what happened next was something no one could have predicted. In the blink of an eye, he was thrown out with a punch by the store manager. That's right, a punch. But what Johnny did after this humiliation was simply shocking, and no one, not even the manager, could have imagined the twist that was about to unfold. You might be wondering, how could someone like Johnny Depp, one of Hollywood's biggest stars, be treated this way? And what did he do in response to such an affront? Trust me, what happened next will leave you speechless. This story isn't just about fame or money. It's about respect, dignity, and, above all, how you should never underestimate someone. Now tell me, have you ever faced a situation that left you stunned, but later you took action that changed everything? If so, share your story in the comments. And before we dive into this story full of twists, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more incredible stories like this one. Let's find out what Johnny Depp did next. You're going to be impressed. Johnny Depp, with a serious expression, looked at the dealership manager. He never imagined that a simple visit to a luxury car dealership could turn into a nightmare. But what the manager did was more than just a lapse in judgment. It was a direct provocation, an attempt to humiliate him in front of everyone. And apparently, the manager had no idea who he was dealing with. The man, with a robust appearance and an arrogant posture, seemed oblivious to the weight of his words. "We don't make exceptions for anyone here, not even celebrities," he said with a smug smile. For a moment, Johnny thought about turning around and leaving. After all, he could easily buy any car there without even negotiating. But something inside him made him stay. The manager's response was swift and brutal, a punch. Not just any punch, but a gesture of disdain, as if Johnny were just another ordinary customer. The impact was strong, but what truly shocked was the evident scorn in the manager's eyes. He thought that, because Johnny was famous, he wouldn't have the courage to react. He was about to find out how wrong he was. Johnny, unshaken, took a step back. The physical pain was almost non-existent compared to the humiliation, but something inside him began to boil, a controlled anger, a sense of injustice. He wasn't just an actor. He was a human being, and no one had the right to treat him that way. The manager, thinking he had won, made an arrogant gesture with his hand, as if Johnny were a mere insect. But what happened next made everyone in the dealership hold their breath. Depp didn't step back, as if he were challenging the entire world. He took a deep breath, looking the manager straight in the eye, and then, in a calm but firm tone, said, "You can disrespect me here, but you won't get away with this." Silence filled the room. No one knew how to react. Some customers watched curiously, while others seemed uncomfortable, but everyone was waiting to see what Johnny would do next. The manager, with a nervous smile, didn't know what to do. He thought he was in control of the situation, but Johnny was about to turn the tables in a way no one could have predicted. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. Johnny stood there, his gaze unwavering as he locked eyes with the manager. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, each second heavier than the last. The manager, still standing behind the counter, seemed to hesitate for the first time. His cocky smirk faltered, but only for a brief moment before he regained his composure. "Are you really going to stand there and lecture me?" the manager sneered, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You think just because you're Johnny Depp, you can walk in here and demand special treatment?" Johnny didn't flinch. He had been underestimated his entire life, whether it was in his career or personal life. He was used to people looking at him and thinking they knew who he was based on his fame, but that didn't define him. Not anymore. "I'm not asking for special treatment," Johnny replied, his voice calm but firm. "I'm asking for respect. And I think you owe me that, just like you owe every other customer who walks in here." The manager's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a smirk again, but it was no longer confident. It was defensive. "Respect? You'll get respect when you earn it, just like everyone else. Now, I suggest you leave before this gets worse." Johnny could feel the frustration bubbling up inside him, but he kept his cool. He knew that reacting in anger would only fuel the manager's disdain. He needed to show him, and everyone in the room, that this wasn't about his celebrity status. It was about standing up for what was right. He took a step forward, his gaze never leaving the manager's. You don't get to decide when I earn respect. Respect is given, not demanded. And right now, you're the one who's failing. The manager's face turned red, his fists clenched. Get out. Now. Johnny didn't move. He was done playing by the manager's rules. He wasn't about to back down, not when he knew he was right. The tension was unbearable, and everyone in the room was watching, waiting for what would happen next. And then, in a move that shocked everyone, including the manager, Johnny did something unexpected. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, dialing a number with a calm precision. The manager's eyes widened, and for a split second, he seemed to realize that Johnny wasn't just a celebrity. He was someone who had the power to turn the situation around. I'm calling the owner, Johnny said, his voice unwavering. And when he hears about this, you won't just lose your job. You'll lose your dignity. The manager's face paled. He stammered, his arrogance slipping away as he realized the gravity of the situation. Johnny wasn't just standing up for himself. He was standing up for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly, dismissed, or disrespected. As Johnny dialed the number, the manager's panic was evident. His face had turned from red to pale, his confidence completely shattered. The silence in the showroom was deafening, with only the faint sound of Johnny's phone ringing breaking through the tension. The manager, realizing his mistake, began to stammer. Wait, Mr. Depp, I didn't mean... Johnny didn't let him finish. He held up a hand, signaling for silence. You didn't mean to disrespect me? You didn't mean to treat me like I'm beneath you? His voice was calm, but there was a steely edge to it. You didn't mean to embarrass me in front of everyone? Well, guess what? It doesn't matter what you meant. What matters is what you did. Johnny's words hung in the air, and for a moment, the manager seemed to shrink under the weight of them. The customers in the showroom, who had been watching in stunned silence, began to murmur amongst themselves. They had never seen a celebrity handle a situation like this before. Most people would have left, or worse, called their lawyers. But not Johnny Depp. He was standing his ground, and that alone was sending a powerful message. Listen, Johnny continued, his voice still calm, but with a sense of authority. I don't need to prove anything to you, but I will make sure that you understand one thing. I don't let anyone walk all over me. Not in Hollywood, and certainly not in a car dealership. The manager, now visibly sweating, took a step back, his bravado completely gone. Johnny wasn't just standing up for himself. He was challenging the system, challenging the idea that people like the manager could get away with treating others like this, simply because they thought they had power. Johnny wasn't some actor who could be dismissed with a sneer. He was a person, and he demanded respect. As the phone continued to ring, the manager's anxiety grew. Please, Mr. Depp, I'm sorry. I didn't know who you were. You didn't know who I was? Johnny interrupted, a hint of disbelief in his voice. I'm not asking you to know my whole life story. I'm asking you to treat me like a human being, like you would anyone else who walked through that door. At that moment, the phone call connected. Johnny put the phone on speaker, and a deep voice echoed through the room. This is the owner. What's going on here? The manager's face went even paler. Sir, there's been a misunderstanding. Johnny cut him off. There's no misunderstanding. I'm here to buy a car, and your manager just assaulted me for no reason. The room fell into a stunned silence. The owner, on the other end of the line, seemed to pause for a moment, processing what Johnny had said. Assaulted you? He repeated, his voice sharp. I'm listening. Tell me what happened. Johnny didn't hesitate. He recounted the entire interaction, his voice unwavering. I came in looking to make a purchase. The manager treated me with disrespect, and when I called him out on it, he physically attacked me. Now, I'm giving you a chance to fix this before it gets out of hand. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Johnny could hear the owner's breath, the tension palpable. Finally, the owner spoke, his tone suddenly serious. Stay right there. I'll be there in 10 minutes. And as for you, he said, addressing the manager, you're fired. I'll deal with you later. The manager's face was a mix of shock and disbelief. He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. Johnny had done it. He had not only stood up for himself, but had also exposed the manager's cruelty for what it was. Johnny hung up the phone and turned to the room, his expression calm but resolute. Now, If you'll excuse me, I'll be waiting for my car, he said, his voice dripping with irony. The customers in the showroom, who had been watching the entire scene unfold, began to clap. Slowly at first, unsure of what they had just witnessed, but then with growing enthusiasm. Johnny had done more than stand up for himself. He had shown everyone in that room that no one, no matter who they were, should ever be treated with disrespect. The showroom was now buzzing with energy, a mixture of awe and disbelief hanging in the air. Johnny had just turned the tide, but something told him this wasn't over. He'd faced down a rude manager, but there was still more to the story, more that no one could have predicted. Minutes later, the door to the showroom opened with a soft chime, and a man in a sharp suit stepped inside. His presence immediately commanded attention. The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward him. He was tall, with a stern expression and an air of authority that made it clear he was no ordinary customer. Johnny looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly. This wasn't the owner, the man who had called him. This was someone else. The new arrival walked directly toward Johnny, his gaze unwavering. "Mr. Depp, I presume?" the man asked, his voice smooth but carrying an edge of something more. Johnny stood up slowly, his posture relaxed but alert. "That's me," Johnny replied, his voice steady. "And you are?" The man extended his hand, a cold smile on his lips. "I'm Victor Hayes, the real owner of this dealership. The man you spoke to on the phone is just a front. He's a manager, but he's not the one who calls the shots around here." Johnny's mind raced. The plot was thickening, but he wasn't about to let himself get caught up in whatever game was being played. "So, you're the one who's been running this place all along?" Victor nodded, his smile never faltering. "That's right. And I've been watching you, Johnny. I've been watching how you handle yourself, how you stand up for what you believe in." Johnny's eyes narrowed. "And why is that?" Victor chuckled, a low, almost menacing sound. "Because I know what you're capable of. You're not just some actor. You're a symbol of something bigger. You've been fighting battles your whole life, and you've won. You've shown the world that no one can keep you down. But that's not what I'm here to talk about." Johnny's heart skipped a beat. This was getting strange, but he wasn't about to back down. "Then what are you here to talk about?" Victor leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I'm here to offer you something. A deal. Something that will change your life forever." Johnny stood still, his mind racing. He could feel the tension building in the room. The customers who had been watching the scene unfold were now leaning in, eager to see what would happen next. Johnny had been through his fair share of bizarre situations, but this one was different. This wasn't about a car deal or a petty confrontation. This was something much bigger. Victor pulled out a small, sleek envelope from his jacket pocket and placed it on the counter in front of Johnny. "Inside this envelope is an opportunity," Victor continued. "An opportunity that only a select few get. It's a chance to be part of something bigger, something that will change the way people see you. But it's not for everyone. Only those who are willing to take a risk." Johnny's curiosity piqued, but his instincts told him to be cautious. He wasn't about to be swept up in some elaborate scheme. "And what exactly is this opportunity?" Victor's smile grew wider. "It's a chance to make a real difference, to take your influence and use it in ways you've never imagined. But there's a price that not everyone is willing to pay." Johnny's mind spun. He had been offered many things in his life, but nothing like this. He wasn't a man who was easily swayed by promises of power or fame. But something about Victor's words felt different. The air around them seemed to crackle with possibility. And for the first time in a long time, Johnny felt a sense of intrigue. Before he could respond, the door opened again, and a woman walked in. She was dressed in business attire, her expression serious. She glanced at Johnny, then at Victor, and without a word, she handed him a phone. Victor took the phone and placed it to his ear. "Yes, it's done," he said, his tone now cold and professional. "We have our man." Johnny felt a chill run down his spine. This was no ordinary car dealership. There was something much darker at play here, and Johnny had just stepped into the middle of it. As Victor hung up the phone, he turned to Johnny, his smile now gone. "You've just become part of something much bigger than you could ever have imagined, Johnny. But you need to decide if you're ready to pay the price." Johnny's mind raced as Victor's words echoed in his ears. He had always prided himself on being in control, on making his own choices. But this was different. This wasn't just another film role or business deal. This was something far more dangerous, something that could change the trajectory of his life forever. Victor stood there, waiting for Johnny's response, his eyes calculating, as if he already knew what Johnny would say. But Johnny wasn't so easily read. He had been through enough in his life to know when something felt off. And right now, everything about this situation felt wrong. "Let me get this straight," Johnny said, his voice steady but laced with suspicion. "You're offering me a chance to be part of some secretive, high-stakes game? And you're telling me there's a price, but you won't tell me what it is?" Victor's smile returned, but it was colder now, more predatory. "That's right. But you're not the kind of man who backs down from a challenge, are you, Johnny?" Johnny's gaze never wavered. "No, I'm not. But I don't do business with people I don't trust." For a moment, there was a flicker of something, maybe respect, maybe annoyance, in Victor's eyes. But he quickly masked it with another smile. "I understand, but think about it, Johnny. You've spent your whole life fighting for what you believe in. Now, you have the chance to do something truly significant, to change the world, to be remembered for something greater than just your roles in movies." Johnny felt a wave of doubt wash over him. He had always known that fame could be a double-edged sword, but he had never been tempted by the allure of power or control. He had built his career on authenticity, on being true to himself. And yet, here he was, facing a man who promised him the world. But at what cost? "Look," Johnny said, taking a step back, "I didn't come here for some grand conspiracy. I came here to buy a car. But it seems like you're offering me something else. Something I don't need." Victor's expression hardened. "You don't need it now, Johnny. But you will. Everyone does eventually. The question is, will you be ready when the time comes?" Johnny's mind was spinning. He had never felt more conflicted in his life. On one hand, there was the temptation of something bigger, something that could give him more power, more influence. On the other hand, there was his integrity, the part of him that had always stayed true to who he was no matter the cost. Victor seemed to sense Johnny's hesitation. "You've been offered opportunities before, haven't you? Roles, deals, endorsements. But this is different. This is about leaving a legacy, about shaping the future. And you, Johnny, you have the power to do that." Johnny took a deep breath, tried to clear his mind. He had to make a decision. But how could he possibly know if this was the right choice? Or if it was just another trap, another game to be played by people who thought they could control him? Then a thought struck him. He didn't need to make a decision right now. He could walk away. He could leave this dealership and never look back. It was his life, after all, and he had spent too many years fighting for his freedom to let someone else dictate his path. With newfound clarity, Johnny looked at Victor and shook his head. "I'm not interested in your game. I'm not interested in your offer. I don't need to change the world by becoming something I'm not." Victor's smile faltered for the briefest of moments. "You'll regret this, Johnny. You'll see. This opportunity doesn't come around often." Johnny didn't flinch. "Maybe, but I'll take my chances. I've always trusted my gut, and right now it's telling me to walk away." And with that, Johnny turned on his heel and walked toward the door. The showroom felt different now, quieter, as if the air itself had shifted. The customers, who had been watching in awe, were now murmuring amongst themselves, unsure of what they had just witnessed. Johnny stepped outside into the bright sunlight, feeling the weight of the decision lift from his shoulders. He had chosen the path of integrity, the path that had always served him well. And as he walked away from the dealership, he knew that he had made the right choice. Johnny had barely taken a few steps when he heard the door of the dealership swing open behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know it was Victor. The man was persistent, but Johnny wasn't about to let himself be dragged back into that web of intrigue. "You think you've won, don't you?" Victor's voice called out, sharp and accusing. Johnny stopped, but didn't turn around. He could feel the weight of Victor's gaze on his back, but he stood tall, unshaken. "I didn't come here to win. I came here to be myself, and I'm not going to let anyone change that." There was a long silence. Then, to Johnny's surprise, Victor's voice softened. "You're making a mistake, Johnny. You're walking away from something that could give you everything you've ever wanted, Johnny finally turned around, his expression calm but firm. Everything I've ever wanted? Or everything you think I should want? Victor looked taken aback, his usual confidence faltering. You don't understand. This is bigger than you, bigger than me. It's about influence, power, and legacy. It's about making your mark on the world. Johnny shook his head. I don't need to make my mark that way. I've already made my mark by being true to who I am. That's the legacy I want to leave behind. Victor stood there for a moment, seemingly lost in thought. Then, with a sigh, he turned and walked back into the dealership without another word. Johnny stood there for a moment longer, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over him. The pressure had lifted. He had made his choice, and it had been the right one. As Johnny walked away, he noticed the people inside the dealership watching him through the windows. Some of them were still whispering to each other, their faces filled with curiosity. He knew they were all wondering what had just happened. But Johnny didn't care. He had nothing to prove to them. He reached his car and got in, the engine purring to life beneath him. As he pulled out of the dealership parking lot, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had stood his ground. He had refused to be swayed by the promises of power and influence. And in doing so, he had proved something to himself and to everyone watching. As Johnny drove down the road, the events of the day began to settle in his mind. He had faced a test, one that many would have failed. He had been offered something that seemed too good to resist, an opportunity to change his life, to gain influence and power beyond his wildest dreams. But Johnny knew that those things came at a cost, and he wasn't willing to pay that price. He thought about the people who had watched the whole scene unfold in the dealership. They had seen him stand up for what he believed in. They had seen him refuse to be controlled by the promises of easy success. And in that moment, Johnny realized that his actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. The world was full of temptations, full of people who would try to pull you in with promises of wealth, power, and fame. But those things were fleeting. They didn't last. What mattered was staying true to yourself, no matter what. Johnny's mind drifted back to his career, to the many roles he had played over the years. He had been through ups and downs, faced countless challenges, but he had always come out stronger on the other side. And now, he had faced the biggest test of all, the test of his own integrity. He didn't need to be part of some secretive, high-stakes game. He didn't need to be anyone other than who he was. Johnny Depp had already made his mark on the world in his own way. And that was enough. As he drove, Johnny couldn't help but smile. He had walked away from something that could have changed his life, but in doing so, he had gained something even more valuable, a sense of peace. He had stayed true to himself, and that was worth more than any offer could ever be. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the road ahead. Johnny's heart felt light, his mind clear. He had made the right choice, and he knew that no matter what came next, he would face it with the same confidence and integrity that had brought him this far. And as the world around him continued to turn, Johnny Depp knew one thing for sure. Some opportunities were meant to be left behind. And the ones that truly mattered were the ones that allowed you to remain true to yourself. As Johnny drove further away from the dealership, the weight of the decision slowly began to fade. The road stretched ahead, quiet and peaceful, a stark contrast to the tension that had filled the dealership moments ago. He couldn't help but reflect on everything that had transpired. He had been tested. The world had handed him an opportunity, a path to wealth, power, and influence, but it came at a price. And in that moment, Johnny had made a choice that would define him far more than any role he'd ever played on a screen. He had chosen to stay true to himself. He thought about the people who had watched the confrontation from the showroom. They had seen the power struggle unfold, and maybe, just maybe, they had learned something too. Johnny's actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. He hadn't just walked away from an offer. He had walked away from the temptation to compromise his values. And that wasn't something anyone could take away from him. Johnny smiled to himself. The world was full of distractions, shiny promises, and easy paths to success. But at the end of the day, it wasn't the wealth or the power that mattered. It was the ability to look yourself in the mirror and know you had done the right thing, even when it was hard, even when the world was telling you to do otherwise. As he drove, Johnny thought about the legacy he wanted to leave behind. It wasn't about the roles he played or the fame he had garnered. It was about the choices he made, the ones that defined his character. Johnny had always prided himself on his authenticity, and today, he had proved that it was worth more than any offer of power or control. He had stood his ground, refused to be manipulated, and walked away from something that would have changed his life forever. And in doing so, he had gained something far more valuable than anything money or influence could buy: peace of mind. Johnny's thoughts turned to his fans. They had been with him through thick and thin, watching him on screen, supporting him through his highs and lows. And now, they would see him in a new light. They would see that Johnny Depp wasn't just an actor or a celebrity. He was a man who valued integrity over everything else. A man who refused to be swayed by the allure of easy success. The road ahead seemed clearer now. Johnny had made his choice, and it had been the right one. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He had already proved his worth to himself, and that was enough. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the horizon, Johnny felt a sense of gratitude wash over him. He had been given the chance to make a difference, to stand up for what he believed in, and in doing so, he had found something more valuable than any material possession. He had found peace. Johnny Depp knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but as long as he stayed true to himself, he would always find his way. And that, he realized, was the greatest gift of all.